bet some of you in this room, in fact, I think a lot of you in this room, might think of yourself as change agents. You want to make a better world. So let me tell you some stories based on my experiences and share some of my lessons. But first, we have to start in my childhood. I'm Puerto Rican by birth. Ay, qué bueno. I already feel better. My dad was a sergeant in the Army. We lived all over the place, and we ended up in Texas, so I like to say Puerto Rican by birth, Texan by nationality. My father had a drinking problem. In fact, you could say he was an alcoholic. And there were many, many fights in my family. My mother and he would fight all the time. There was violence. The police would come. It developed actually an instinct in my mind like a radar, where I could tell the moment he walked in from work in a particular evening if it was going to be a bad night. Now, as I got older, the possibility of me going to college arose, I became a topic in their fights because he couldn't quite understand why a woman needed to go to college, and he thought that I was too smart for him, and he used to like to call me chicken shit intellectual.
Like
chicken
fish
shit
in
lawyer.
a barrel.
The final actor in this little drama is my brother, who at the time had a horrible case of acne, but he also had a wonderful pair of paisley pajamas that I coveted to this day. And my mother had heard from her coworkers that if someone has really bad acne, that they should use this hemorrhoid medicine on their face. At the time, true stories. All my stories tonight are true. Called Enzo.
I'm sure.
So by the time that the fight this particular evening began, my brother had the acne medicine all over his face, the paisley pajama bottoms, so his face and the pajama bottoms looked the same. The fight is underway. I mean, I'm really worried about physical violence, so I decide to call the police. The police come, immediately kind of makes everybody stop in their tracks. And the policeman, the officer says, "Can anybody tell me what the problem is here?" And my brother steps forward in all his glory, and he says, "I can, sir." And the officer says, "Well, son, please go ahead." And my brother says, very knowingly, "You see, sir, the problem is my sister is an intellectual." Now, I can't let you laugh too long because you cut into my time. Now, a couple of years later, I'm an internship at an intern at the State Department, working for N. Stephen Payne, and he's a PhD historian. We're telling these stories, and he goes, I have a very similar background.
Find me a path.
My father, we're immigrants. He never went to college, and he really resented my education. We would have these horrible fights until one day I realized that if I'm the one with the PhD, if I'm the smartest person in the room,
Let's get cracking.
my responsibility to make sure that we're having productive conversations. And that's the first lesson that I want to share with you. If you're the change agent, if you're so smart, then it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you have productive conversations. Now, I ended up working for the CIA, and unlike the previous speaker, it was not a lifetime goal. Basically, when I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer because I met some, I had to go in another direction. So the first 10 years at CIA were great. Actually, first 15 years, and in the mid-90s, along comes this little thing called the internet. And I became convinced very early on that the internet was going to change the way all knowledge organizations did their work. And I started arguing that the CIA had to adapt itself to the internet. The problem was that I was kind of stunned. Everybody thought I was crazy, and everyone seemed very unhappy that I was making that suggestion. It wasn't until years later, I'm embarrassed to admit, that I realized what I was doing. The internet, back then, in its innocent days, was about open and communication, interactive. Everybody has access to information. That's not what the CIA was about. So basically, I was arguing for theological change. I might as well have been Martin Luther banging up the letters at the church in Wittenberg. And the thing about theological change is that it is really, really hard, right? So, second lesson, if you're a change agent, think about the kind of change that you're advocating. And if it's really opposite the values of your organization, it's illogical. I'm not telling you don't do it, but go into it with your eyes open. It's very good. So a couple of years after that, I'm at this event. We're in New York City. We're exchanging ideas with business people. And we have a cocktail reception afterward, and this woman from DuPont comes up to me, and like laser focus, she says, "Carmen, I have something to tell you." Never met her before. I go, "Well, what is it?" And she goes, "You're a heretic in your organization." And that was the first time I'd ever had that word associated with me. And she says, "And let me tell you about being a heretic in an organization. You're going to be really uncomfortable. Your life is going to be very hard. And to survive, you've got to understand how uncomfortable it's going to be. But it's not enough to understand that it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're going to have to learn to be happy about it even, because when you're uncomfortable, at least you know you're being true to your principles." So, well, needless to say, things didn't go that well for me. And I got to this point in my career, late 90s, I couldn't get a good job. People thought I was cynical and negative, and I had to stop giving up hope. And then this job announcement came out for a new position. At the time, we were our daily newspaper, classified newspaper that we delivered to customers in Washington, D.C. was being leaked all the time, so that the Washington Post seemed to get the information before our customers did. And this was like a real problem. So it was inconvenient. So they came up with a new position, and this position was to fix the security problem of our publication. Well, really, I could care less about security. It was all about details and kind of bureaucratic work. But in that long list of responsibilities for this new position, the person was in charge of exploring the new digital technologies to see how they could be used to deliver our intelligence to our customers. And I was like, that's it. That's the opening. Now, I didn't figure it out. I didn't come up with why it worked, right? But now I understand that particularly if you're trying to make theological change, it's kind of smart to try to see if you can approach it through an adjacency, through something that is already within the value system of the organization, and kind of sneak in the side door. And that's exactly what happened in my case. I got this with the help of a lot of friends and colleagues. We conquered the security problem, and that gave me the liberty, the space to explore digital technology. Now, we're talking a lot about what I do. And one of the real problems with change agents is that they get involved in your ego and about getting the credit for your brilliant ideas, and you don't bring other people along with your idea. And I'm here to tell you that the very first thing a change agent should do is to make their idea somebody else's idea, right? Is to make your idea community property. And in fact, the very best supporters you can get are people that could otherwise have been opponents. People that oppose your idea, you need to talk to them, to be in the same room with them, and see if you can find some common ground. But it's not sufficient enough to gain allies, to gain supporters. You gotta keep them. You can't turn a corner. Move so quickly with your idea that valuable supporters fall off the back of the bus, right? So at the beginning, particularly, of your change effort, the number of your supporters, the volume of your supporters is actually more important than the purity of your idea. A few more lessons that I learned. So I had a group of female friends at CIA. We had been together for 15 or 20 years, and we had helped each other in our careers, but they didn't see the future the way I saw it, and our relationship became increasingly strained. I remember one day they said to me, "Carmen, we're getting the impression that you're not going to shut up until we admit you're right." And I kind of resembled that remark, right? I felt that they had like one evening, and way too much alcohol was involved. I just blew up at them, and I lost those friendships. I never spoke to them again. So my lesson here is, and well, more importantly,
Not make my hammer mad.
so my lesson here is know when to quit, or at least retreat, or take a respite. And how can you know when to quit? Well, one thing that can happen, one development that should tell you that maybe it's too late, is when you don't recognize the person that they're describing. Remember when I said that people thought I was cynical and negative? I'm not a cynical and negative person. I should have taken a respite then. Now, a couple of years ago, I was interviewed on the show Entrepreneurs Are Everywhere. Steve Blank, this millionaire guy, and he asked me, one of the questions he asked me was, tell me about your family life. What was it like? And I said, it's very chaotic, my father was an alcoholic, and Steve goes, aha. I asked the entrepreneurs I interviewed that question, and most of them tell me that their childhood was chaotic. And he said his theory, his hypothesis is that having that kind of chaotic childhood develops your emotional intelligence skills, develops your emotional radar, and makes you a better communicator to other people. So, develop your emotional intelligence skills. Now, I also had occasion around the same time to go to CIA and talk to a group of agents who invited me to come. Pleasant conversation. This guy comes up to me afterwards. Tom, I kind of vaguely recognized him. And he said, Carmen, you don't know this. You changed my life. And I go, what do you mean, though? I heard you talk a few years ago, still at tomorrow, about how we were not created for and I said, I thought to myself, she's right. And so I went and investigated where I could get a master's in creativity. I got the CIA to pay for it, and now I teach the creativity classes at CIA. And I was blown away by that, because the lesson here is, when you're a change agent, is you have to always speak your truth, because somebody will hear you.
Empire above all.
My story starts in Moscow. I was 15 years old. My best friend and I, we were part of a group of Westerners visiting the Soviet Union. This was in 1987, a few years before the fall of the communist regime. We were given an official tour guide who was assigned to us, and the tour would start in the morning, and we were checked into our hotel rooms for the night. My friend said to me, let's go outside into the city. I thought it was a great idea, dumb idea. So we grabbed our coats and we snuck out past security and into the street. We found the entrance to the metro. The Moscow underground transportation system is the deepest one in the world. The ride down the escalator took a full minute. Once we were down there, my friend had it right to an open train, and I pulled him back. I said, wait, let's write down the name of the station so we can find our way back. So I had a notepad, and I took a notepad and I wrote down the letters of the station, and we hopped on the train and went some train hopping. And that was fun because, well, actually it was weird. There were a lot of people, they probably all coming home from work, and they were all dressed in brown and gray clothes, and it looked very, very different from what we were used to at home. But the stations were lovely. There were stations with statues, with paintings on the wall, and glass displays, and it was really like museums. We would never have expected that. Everything was perfectly clean. Well, what was weird though is that the people, nobody seemed to speak. Everyone seemed to be looking at us, and it kind of weirded us out.
What are we doing?
30 minutes, we had enough, and we wanted to go home. I showed my note to someone, and they directed me over there, and over there I showed my note to another person, and they directed us to the other way. And then a third person directed us sideways.
Charmed, I'm sure.
Over the stairs, the sign. Turned out I had written down the Russian word for exit. So we headed upstairs and we found a taxi. That was great. We told the driver, into this hotel, willing to take us. I remember sitting next to the driver, handing him 50 rubles. He looked at me and said, "Neil, Boma." $50, that was like, I don't know, 20 times that amount or something. That was not an option for us. So we had to get out of the taxi and he drove away, leaving us standing there. It was a cold night. Everything was strange for us and we were teenagers. We were pretty nervous. We didn't know what to do. Well, we started walking.
Lucky day.
To the end of the block. We turned the corner and 200 yards in front of us,
I recommend skipping.
well, this experience affected me in two ways. The first is that anytime after this trip that I would hear anyone speak Russian, I would just cringe. And the second one is that it taught me the importance of understanding the local language when you're traveling. And it actually led to me learning another 4 languages fluently over the following years. Now, before I go on, I'd like to know in the audience, do we have a little bit of light maybe in the audience? Just like to know who, by show of hands, who is not a native English speaker. Must be 99%. Anyone who doesn't speak English, stand up. All right, so I can assume all of you have, gone through the process of learning a language. Anybody who speaks 3 or more languages?
Lucky day.
Wow, that is maybe 70%. 4 or more languages, anyone? Still quite a bit. Anyone speak 5 or more languages?
Skipping.
Wow, come see me during the break.
This is burning. This is burning.
All right, well, to me, learning a language is for me, it's like a deck of playing cards lying face down on the table. As you start learning and understanding, the cards start opening up for you. Now, there's no standard way of classifying this, but as you learn, you reach certain milestones. The first one would be that like 25% of the cards are turned up, you reach like a basic level. At this level, you have a base vocabulary, some grammar, and you're able
That makes it purple.
to make these very simple conversations and communicate a little bit. And your study goes on. You reach this magical point of fluency, what we call being fluent in a language. Now, what does this mean? Being fluent in a language, it means that you've turned up more than 50% of the cards in the deck. And that is the point where the language becomes part of your subconscious, so that even if you don't use it anymore for 10 years or longer, you will not forget it. You can get back into it within a very, very short time. So this is a level where I'm comfortable thinking in the language, comfortable communicating. Now, some people go on and reach like a mastery level. By that time, you know classic literature in the other language and have maybe an in-depth knowledge of specialized fields. That's often the point taken in academia. For me, when I learned my first foreign language, I had a head start because, well, I was born to a German-speaking mother and an American father. Now, when I was a baby, I didn't really understand that what my parents were speaking to me were 2 separate languages. But by the time I was 2 years old,
I see things clearly.
women speak only German. Men only speak English. Imagine the fun my parents had when they introduced me to couples. Well, being a bilingual was actually pretty helpful in learning my first language. Definitely helped. But it also gave me something else. It gave me 2 identities, the ability to switch between them. When you're a native speaker of more than one language, then your personality, your humor, your value system, they change as you switch languages. This can have huge advantages.
Charmed, I'm sure.
I mean, some studies have shown like an increased problem-solving ability, or even a higher resistance to Alzheimer's disease. But what I'm most interested in is that it's actually given me a lot of social benefits. When you're a native speaker, and then you feel at home among native speakers, in a culture, and also native speakers accept you.
Slice them.
Now, is this only relevant to native speakers? That's the question. But wouldn't it be cool if a person learning a foreign language actually develop another identity, actually enjoy the social benefits of a native speaker that go beyond communication skills? Well, that's what happened to me. I was able to do that, and I'll show you from my experience how I think this can be achieved. So if we say this green area here is the level of the native speaker, the first thing to note is that on your way to reaching fluency, there is not really any shortcut. There are some methods that you can use, such as the Pareto principle, where you identify the 20% of the most effective material to study. There are some apps like for time-spaced learning that increase vocabulary retention. They save a little time, but in the end, there's no way around working with the material, practicing it until you reach the fluency level. But the second thing to note is that going from fluency to mastery is a much slower process, and it requires more effort. And that's why most people, they just stop at fluency. They're not good enough, and they don't even attempt to venture on, and I can understand it. But the good news is, to get the benefits of a native speaker at a native speaker level, you don't have to go through mastery in the academic sense. In fact, you can skip this step altogether. So, if you think about it, there are many native speakers who do not have an in-depth knowledge of specialized skills or sophisticated vocabulary, but that's not really what is required. So how do you do it? What is required? Well, I want to give you 3 areas to focus on learning and interacting with native speakers. First is work eliminating your accent. And where I said eliminating, it should be at least minimizing it. This is, in my opinion, the most overlooked aspect of language learning today, but it's also the most important one to reach what I call native speaker level, or a speaker-like level. If you communicate without an accent or almost without an accent, this changes how natives behave towards you unconsciously. And it also gives you the ability to adapt a new self-image. The best way that I have found, the best exercise I have found to improve your pronunciation is what I call the perfect sentence technique. What you do is you find a native speaker to help you, and you take a book in the foreign language, you open it at a random page, and you read the first sentence. Then you ask the native speaker to rate you on obvious accent, slight accent, no accent. Then the native speaker will read this sentence back to you. You have to listen carefully, and then you repeat. And you repeat this process over and over until the native speaker tells you that he can no longer hear an accent when you read the sentence. Now, I realize it can take a very long time even just to get one sentence right. But I promise you, if you are persistent and if you patiently work on this, you will be amazed what happens to your accent. The second area to focus on is using verbs and expressions that locals use. Now, we all know the situation that vocabulary can be region-specific. Like in the US, you stand in line, in the UK, you queue. That's all good, but sometimes the spoken word is so different, the speech is so different from what you get in textbooks, that the books are almost useless if you want to converse with natives.
I can do this.
I want to give you an example. In the French language, there are words like le travail, which is my work. A French person talking to his friend would probably say mon boulot, which is a completely different word. The same for the clothes, les vêtements, but you will hear les fringues. Or money is l'argent, but you can say fric, sous, or many other expressions for this. So obviously I'm only scratching the surface here, but here you actually have to learn all of these words and expressions one by one. And of course you have to interact with natives
Yep.
to do that.
The glass is
But
half
after you
empty.
reach a critical mass that you are comfortable with, it'll actually be easier. When you encounter something new, you'll just pick it up in one go, like native speakers would hear words that or expressions they didn't know before. The third area to work on is adopting cultural traits. What do I mean by that? So let me ask you, what does this gesture mean to you? Any Italians here? Okay, now depending on what culture you're from, this could mean something, or it could just mean something like or how could you? Or it could just be signaling food, give me food. Interesting. In the Middle East, this is just a standard way of signaling, please wait. So these kind of traits you have to internalize, and sometimes they're hard to spot, and it takes a lot of active listening. I want to give you a few more examples. So imagine I'm with three of my friends, an American, a German, and a Frenchman. Like we're walking and maybe the American bumps his head.
Where's the
His
action?
initial reaction might be, ouch. That's how you say it in English. But the German that, gets, elbowed in the crowd, you would say, aua. And the French person, you might step on a nail and say, aïe. So this, of course, in your target language, this is something you have to observe and also internalize, and it has to become part of you. I'm with these three friends, and I sit with them, and let's say I serve them tea, and I ask the American, would you like a biscuit with your tea? And if he answers in the affirmative, he might say, uh-huh. And I can ask the German, do you know what tea this is? And I say, and then, and I asked the Frenchman, and he liked this, and I said, so you notice these differences, they really require active listening. So all of these three things that I told you, which is pronunciation and colloquial speech and adopting these cultural traits,
By your command.
they all require that you interact with natives as much as possible. Ideally, you should fully immerse yourself in the culture.
Glass is
Now, if you
half
have the chance
empty.
to live abroad for a while, that would be great. Or maybe live among natives in your hometown. Perhaps just have a romantic relationship, or even just spend times with, coworkers. Romantic relationships, I could do a whole talk about that. That works really well for these things. So this will be different for everybody, of course. But
Let's get going.
even when you're not around natives, your learning must not stop. Because what you can do, you can watch TV shows and films and mimic the characters. Write down everything that you practice. I also want to encourage you great. Because they tell stories. They don't not only help your pronunciation when you sing them, but they also, if they're emotional, they can anchor these expressions into your active vocabulary. And it's like speaking all day and really using these expressions unconsciously. It's a great way. So music, definitely. The other thing you need to move towards native speaker status is the right mindset and a belief that if you sound like a native, express yourself like a native, talk like a native, act like a native, you will actually achieve a native-like level. So, if I could only leave you with one thing today, it would be work on your pronunciation. Because pronunciation helps any stage of the learning process, even in the very beginning. It will speed up everything. And it also is the key
Utmost efficiency.
level.
Let's
Almost
get
native
going.
speaker status. So, before I go, I'd like to tell you how I was able to overcome my fear of the Russian language. It was a very, very elegant solution. I married a Russian girl, and I now have little kids in my home that speak Russian to me every day. So, I want to thank you And before I go, I just want to wish you mucho éxito con sus idiomas. C'est un plaisir de présenter devant vous aujourd'hui. אני מאחל לכם הרבה הצלחה עם הלימודים. Good luck to you all and success.
Lucky day.
Hi, everyone. 2 years ago, my life changed forever. My wife Kelsey and I welcomed our daughter Leela into the world. Now, becoming a parent is an amazing, amazing experience. Your whole world changes overnight, and all of your priorities change immediately, so fast that it makes it really difficult to process sometimes. Now, you also have to learn a tremendous amount about being a parent, like, for example, how to dress your child. This was new to me. This is an actual outfit. I thought this was a good idea. And even Leela knows that it's not a good idea. So there was so much to learn and so much craziness all at once. And to add to the craziness, Kelsey and I both work from home. We're entrepreneurs. We run our own businesses. So Kelsey is develops courses online for yoga teachers. I'm an author. And so I'm working from home. Kelsey's working from home. We have an infant, and we're trying to make sure that everything gets done that needs done. And life is really, really, really busy. And a couple weeks into this amazing experience, when the sleep deprivation really kicked in, like around week 8, I had this thought, and it was the same thought that parents across the ages, internationally, everybody has had this thought, which is, I am never going to have free time. Ever again. And somebody said it's true. Yeah, it's not exactly true, but it feels really, really true in that moment. And this was really disconcerting to me because one
I
of
will
the things
protect
that
you.
I enjoy
They may
more
have
than anything
men,
else is
but you
learning
have
new
me.
things. Getting curious about something and diving in and fiddling around and learning through trial and error and eventually becoming good at something. And without this free time, I didn't know how I would do that. And so I'm a geek. I want to keep learning. I want to keep learning. And so what I decided to do was go to the library and go to the bookstore and look at what research says about how we learn and how we learn quickly. And I read a bunch of books. I read a bunch of websites and trying to answer this question, how long does it take to acquire a new skill? You know what I found? 10,000 hours. Anybody ever heard this? 10,000. It takes 10,000 hours. If you want to learn something new, if you want to be good at it, it's going to take 10,000 hours to get there. And I read this in book after book and website after website, and my mental experience of reading all of this stuff was like, no, I don't have time. I don't have time. I am never going to. But that's not true. So 10,000 hours, just to give you a rough order of magnitude, 10,000 hours is a full-time job for 5 years. That's a long time. And we've all had the experience of learning something new, and it didn't take us anywhere close to that, right? So what's up? There's something kind of funky going on here. What the research says and what we expect and have experiences, they don't match up. And what I found, here's the wrinkle. The 10,000 hour rule came out of studies of expert level. There was a professor at Florida State University. His name is Kay Anders. He's the originator of the 10,000 hour rule. And where that came from is he said about the game of telephone a little bit earlier. Here's what happened. An author by the name of Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book in 2007 called Outliers, the Story of Success. And the centerpiece of that book was the 10,000 hour rule. Practice a lot, practice well, and you will do extremely well.
Lighting the way.
So, the message, what Dr. Erickson was actually saying is, it takes 10,000 hours to get to the top of an ultra-competitive field in a very narrow subject. That's what that means. But here's what happened. Ever since Outliers came out, immediately came out, reached the top of the bestseller list, stayed there for 3 solid months. All of a sudden, the 10,000 hour rule was everything. And a society-wide game of telephone started to be built. So this message, it takes 10,000 hours to get to the top of the field. Became, it takes 10,000 hours. Which became, it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. Which became, it takes 10,000 hours to learn.
Slice them.
But that last
Where's the
thing,
action?
takes 10,000 hours to learn something, it's not true.
Let's get started.
So, what the research actually says, if I spend a lot of time here at the CSU library
Stands for
in the
Jinx.
cognitive psychology stats because I'm a geek. And when you actually look at the studies of skill acquisition, you see over and over and
Stands
over
for Jinx.
a graph like this. Now, researchers, whether they're studying a motor skill, something used physically, or a mental skill, they like to study things that they can time.
Pushing my limits.
So they'll give research participants a little task, something that requires learning a little, and they'll track how long it can take for the skill. Here's what this graph says. When you start, so when researchers gave participants
We
a
did
task,
it. We knocked
it
him
took them
over.
a really long time because it was new and they wanted to learn. With a little bit of practice, they get better and better and better, and that early part of practice is really,
Slice
really
'em.
efficient. People get good at things with just a little bit of practice. Now, what's interesting to note is that
Shooting.
if, we don't really, for skills that we want to learn for ourselves, we don't care so much about time, right? We just care about how good we are, whatever it happens.
Watch this.
So if we relabel performance time to how good you are, the graph and you get this famous and widely known, this is the learning curve. And the story of the learning curve is when you start, you're grossly incompetent and you know it, right? With a little bit of practice, you get really good really quick. So that early level of improvement is really fast. And then at a certain point, you reach a plateau, and the subsequent gains become much harder to get, more time to get. Now, my question is, how
Lighting
long,
the way.
right? How long does it take from starting something and being grossly incompetent and knowing it to being reasonably good in that's possible. So, how long does that take? So my that's it. You can go from knowing nothing about any skill that you can think of. Want to learn a language? Want to learn how to draw? Want to learn how to juggle flaming chainsaws? If you put 20 hours of focused, deliberate practice into that thing, you will be astounded. Astounded